success in North America and Europe at its release, perhaps in large part to its argument that the Quranic term Hawar refers not to beautiful virgins in paradise, Jannah, but to grapes there. The thesis of the book is that the text of the Quran was substantially derived from Syriac Christian liturgy, arguing that many obscure portions become clear when they are back translated and interpreted as Syriacism. While there is a scholarly consensus that the language of the Quran is influenced by Syro-Aramaic, Luxemburg's thesis goes beyond mainstream scholarly consensus and was widely received with skepticism and rebuke. The book asserted that the language of the early compositions of the Quran was not exclusively Arabic, as assumed by the classical commentators, but rather is rooted in the Syriac language of the 7th century Meccan tribe of the Quraysh, which is associated in the early histories with the founding of the religion of Islam. Luxemburg's premise is that the Syriac language, which was prevalent throughout the Middle East during the early period of Islam, and was the language of culture and Christian liturgy, had a profound influence on the scriptural composition and meaning of the context of the Quran. 2. Thesis edit. The work advances the thesis that critical sections of the Quran have been misread by generations of readers and Muslim and Western scholars who consider classical Arabic the language of the Quran. Luxemburg's analysis suggests that the prevalent Syro-Aramaic language up to the 7th century formed a stronger etymological basis for its meaning. 3. Contrary to the earlier assumption of a dialect of Arabic spoken in Mecca, the present study has shown that insofar as the Arabic tradition has identified the language of the Quran with that of the Quraysh, the inhabitants of Mecca, this language must instead have been an Aramaic-Arabic hybrid language. It is not just the findings of this study that have led to this insight. Namely, in the framework of this study, an examination of a series of hadith, sayings of the Prophet, has identified Aramaisms that had either been misinterpreted or were inexplicable from the point of view of Arabic. This would lead one to assume that Mecca was originally an Aramaic settlement. Confirmation of this would come from the name Mecca itself, which one has not been able to explain etymologically on the basis of Arabic. But if we take the Syro-Aramaic root kilometer, ma, actually mak, lower, below, as a basis, we get the adjective akm, Makkah, mas, atkm, Makkah, with the meaning of lower, one, form. A notable trait of early written Arabic was that it lacked vowel signs and diacritics which would later distinguish e.g., and thus was prone to mispronunciation. Arabic diacritics were added around the turn of the 8th century on orders of Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, governor of Iraq, in 694 to 714, citation needed. Luxemburg claimed that the Quran contains much ambiguous and even inexplicable language. He asserts that even Muslim scholars find some passages difficult to parse and have written reams of Quranic commentary attempting to explain these passages. However, the assumption behind their endeavours has always been, according to him, that any difficult passage is true, meaningful, and pure Arabic, and that it can be deciphered with the tools of traditional Muslim scholarship. Luxemburg accuses Western academic scholars of the Quran of taking a timid and imitative approach, relying too heavily on the work of Muslim scholars. Luxemburg argues that the Quran was not originally written exclusively in Arabic, but in a mixture with Syriac, the dominant spoken and written language in the Arabian Peninsula through the 8th century. What is meant by Syro-Aramaic, actually Syriac, is the branch of Aramaic in the Near East originally spoken in Edessa and the surrounding area in northwest Mesopotamia, and predominant as a written language from Christianization to the origin of the Quran. For more than a millennium, Aramaic was the lingua franca in the entire Middle Eastern region before being gradually displaced by Arabic beginning in the 7th century. 5. Luxemburg remarked that scholars must start afresh, ignore the old Islamic commentaries, and use only the latest in linguistic and historical methods. Hence, if a particular Quranic word or phrase seems meaningless in Arabic, or can be given meaning only by tortuous conjectures, it makes sense, he argues, to look to Syriac as well as Arabic. Luxemburg also argues that the Quran is based on earlier texts, namely Syriac lectionaries used in Christian churches of Syria, and that it was the work of several generations who adapted these texts into the Quran as known today. According to Islamic tradition, the Quran dates back to the 7th century, while the first examples of Arabic literature in the full sense of the phrase are found only 2 centuries later, at the time of the biography of the Prophet, that is, that the life of Muhammad is written by Ibn Hisham, who died in 828. We may thus establish that post-Quranic Arabic literature developed by degrees in the period following the work of Al-Khalil bin Ahmad, who died in 786, the founder of Arabic lexicography, Kitab al-Ain, and of Sibawayh, who died in 796, to whom the grammar of classical Arabic is due. assume that the composition of the Quran was brought to an end in the year of the Prophet Muhammad's death, in 632, we find before us an interval of 150 years, during which there is no trace of Arabic literature worthy of note. 6. At that time, there were no Arab schools, except, perhaps, for the Christian centers of Al-Anbar and Al-Hira, in southern Mesopotamia, or what is now Iran. The Arabs of that region had been Christianized and instructed by Syrian Christians. Their liturgical language was Syro-Aramaic, and this was the vehicle of their culture, and more generally the language of written communication. 6. Beginning in the 3rd century, Syrian Christians did not limit themselves to bringing their evangelical mission to nearby countries, like Armenia or Persia. They pressed on toward distant territories, all the way to the borders of China and the western coast of India, in addition to the entire Arabian Peninsula, all the way to Yemen and Ethiopia. It is thus rather probable that, in order to proclaim the Christian message to the Arabic peoples, they would have used, among others, the language of the Bedouins, Arabic. In order to spread the gospel, they necessarily made use of a mishmash of languages. But in an era in which Arabic was just an assembly of dialects and had no written form, the missionaries had no choice but to resort to their own literary language and their own culture, that is, Syro-Aramaic. The result was that the language of the Quran was born as a written Arabic language, but one of Aramaic derivation. 6. With his approach of research, Luxembourg is a representative of the Saarbrücken school, which is part of the revisionist school of Islamic study.